Hello, my name is Jose Pablo Viviloni, and I will be talking to you about the history of Puerto Rico's public debt and its effect on modern day society. So, the topics that will be discussed in this presentation are the history and the origin of public debt, uh, which will include the initial transition. We will be taking this topic in chronological order. So it will begin in the initial transition from a rural economy to an industrial economy from the 1930s more or less to the 1950s. Then we will discuss the brief era of prosperity, followed by an accumulation of public debt. Remind you, we're taking this chronologically, so it will make more sense once we're in the presentation. And the beginning of the recession, the effects of this recession in 2006, and vulture funds, the arrival of vulture funds, and what that means. In the 1930s, the economy in Puerto Rico was mainly based in agriculture. Puerto Rico was very behind modern times. It was a very rural nation, and the product in which they based their economy and in which the U.S. invested the most was sugarcane. Now, U.S. was looking for ways to industrialize Puerto Rico and industrialize it quickly. So, in the 1940s, various projects were put in place in which the main purpose was to improve or build Puerto Rico a decent public infrastructure from the ground up, and two of these projects are still in place today, which are the Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica that provides electricity to the entire island, as well as the Autoridad de Acueductos y Alcantarillado, which provides like sanitary disposal of water and arrival of water into the houses. So, after the creation of these government corporations, Puerto Rico was going through a process of very rapid industrialization. And during the decades of the 50s and the 60s, so in these 2 decades, various oil refining companies arrived in Puerto Rico. One of them was known as Corco, which stands for Commonwealth Oil Refining Company. And what these companies did is they took oil and they turned it into various forms of like various derivatives of oil, such as gasoline, which is what we used a lot today. So it was a very big market, and it really helped the economy in Puerto Rico. It provided a lot of jobs, and therefore in the 1950s and in the 1960s, lots of families were moving from rural areas into the cities looking for job opportunities, and this helped boost the industrialization of Puerto Rico even more. So this was all happening very, very rapidly. Okay, so in the late 1960s, the US government approved a measure that allowed foreign countries to export uh, the refined oil directly into the US at much lower prices than the prices that were in Puerto Rico. So we weren't able to compete, and therefore the entire oil refinery business in Puerto Rico crashed. This was due of the new relationship between the United States and Israel. So, in an attempt to reinvigorate Puerto Rico's economy, the United States Congress passes the 936 Amendment, which provided a myriad of tax exemptions for big companies in order to bring them into the island, but they had to comply with a couple of conditions. One of them being that they had to deposit a portion of their income into the local banks, so that would create cash flow within the local economy because the local banks would invest that money. Various companies established themselves in Puerto Rico. One of them is Amgen, which is a very and a huge pharmaceutical company worldwide. It has most of its operation are ran here in Puerto Rico still, and that was thanks to the Amendment 936. And thanks to the arrival of these new companies boosting our economy, Puerto Rico had of some very good years up until the 1990s. Thanks to the Amendment 936 put into action by Congress, Puerto Rico experiences an era of prosperity for the first time in a while, and the top accreditation agencies in the US give the island an excellent credit review. So that means that a Puerto Rican bond was worth a lot at the time due to its growing economy. So, what happened? Local entrepreneurs and business owners started buying bonds and placing and by buying those bonds, they placed their money in Puerto Rico's development. And during this time, since there was a lot of money flowing through the island, various very expensive projects were put into actions. Well, the government was spending a lot of money. What was the government spending its money on? Well, that's always been a very obscure topic, but in terms of this presentation, let's leave it there. The money the government was spending a lot of of money at the time, and after these projects began, the U.S. starts to slowly edit the 936 amendment, editing various aspects of the amendment regarding the incentives to the U.S. companies based in Puerto Rico now. So they were eliminating a lot of these incentives, and because of that, many of the industries left the island. So here we can see a graphic representation of what was happening in Puerto Rico before and after the 936. The US government continued editing the 936 Amendment until they finally eliminated it around 1997. So, as you can see, there is a steady growth of both the total number of enterprises establishing themselves in Puerto Rico, which are the blue columns, and the number of jobs they provided while by establishing themselves in Puerto Rico. And here in 1997, you can see a very dramatic decrease in the number of companies, and also an even more dramatic decrease in the amount of jobs they were providing, represented by this orange line over here. So from 1997 to 2012, it went from approximately 160 something thousand jobs provided by these enterprises to around 75,000 jobs. So that's 100,000, more or less 100,000 jobs lost because of the removal of this amendment. So after the elimination of the Amendment 936, the cash flow that a lot of these companies started exiting the island, and the amount of cash flow that they were providing to the island's economy was, well, it left with them. So the Puerto Rican economy had a lower cash flow than what they were used to when they had a booming economy. But what the government did, instead of canceling any ongoing expensive projects, they started accumulating public debt, and they continued these projects. And by accumulating public debt, they would had to have to pay a fee, like loans work. And this continued for many years, and people were unaware that the economy was going downhill, so they continued buying bonds, and we continued getting a good accreditation because money was still moving throughout the island until finally in 2006, uh, it was the economic bubble finally burst. What I mean by that is that the government wasn't able to pay the debt as fast as it was indebting itself even more. So, and that's basically what a recession is, where the government is so deep in debt that it's not able, it's borrowing money faster than it's able to give back what it already owed. So while the island is deep in recession, the economy finally starts to suffer and to feel its effects, and these are effects that are still being felt throughout the country nowadays, especially since Hurricane Maria. So, in 10 years since 2006, nearly 70,000 government jobs were lost, and it also marked the beginning of the largest exodus in Puerto Rico's history. From 2010 to 2015, about 251,000 Puerto Ricans left the island permanently in search for opportunities. And so, as we can see in this graph, this is a projection of the population in Puerto Rico for the next couple of years if the actual trend continues up until 2022. It was I found it on the internet. It was based on data recollected by U.S. government census. So as we can see, the tendency is that the population will continue to plummet from right now, 2018, up until 2022, and it is very likely that we will be below 3 million inhabitants, which hasn't happened in a while because of the economic crisis and the exodus of Puerto Ricans leaving mainly to the US in search for job opportunities. And so while Puerto Rico is going through an immense economic crisis, Now the country's national credit is extremely low. So what that means is that our national bonds are basically worthless. So the people who bought these bonds, they start trying to get rid of them. What they do is they sell them at extremely low prices. Now, this is where the vulture funds come in. What vulture funds do is they swoop into crumbling economies in different countries and they start buying all the bonds they can, all the bonds they can. And basically, what they do is they buy the debt. So everything that the government owed, hypothetically, to the bond owners, now the government owes to the vulture funds. Now they do this in the hope of profiting. Maybe they won't get everything that is kind of owed to them, but they will. It's a good business. They will probably get more from it than when what they spent on the actual bond. And these are people with a lot of money, so they have good lawyers and whatnot, and they will push as hard as they can just to see how much money they can squeeze out of the crumbling economy that they are they just swooped into. They do this all the time. And so, after understanding what the vulture funds he did in Puerto Rico, that leaves us at where we're at today, which is $73 billion in debt to Wall Street, basically. And the question is, what can we do about the debt? There's been a lot of talk about auditing it, which is uh, realizing an investigation into where that money ended up and who is to blame, which could get very political and very, well, it's a topic for another presentation.